If you have data in a file that you need to import into your program, then this video will explain how to do that. So in this program, we are going to look at how to read and print data from a file that already exists. So in order to do that, we'll still need the fstream that you have here in your pound includes, and we'll look at opening a file, reading from the file, and closing the file. Notice that if you are going to open a file, you do need to have a file. So in this case, I'm going to use a file called temps.txt, and it's going to be in a directory on my computer. Now, in fact, let's go take a look at that temperature file before we start to do the program. I have this file stored in the temp folder on my C drive. So I'm just going to double click to open it up so we can see that in WordPad. And there's not much to it. It's just a list of numbers. So in this case, I'm calling them temperatures, so you could think of them as temperatures in degrees Celsius, and we have one number per line. Now, it isn't necessary that you have one per line as long as they're separated by spaces, but this makes it simple, I think, for you to see. So we just have several numbers in one per line that we want to input. Well, how do we write a program that will do that? Well, again, we need to have the pound include in order to use the file operation, so we need that. And as we did earlier, when we opened up a file to write, we have to have a file pointer. But this time, since it's an input file, it's called IFSTREAM, so input file stream. But then it follows the same thing we did in an earlier video where we were writing to a file. Since we're importing from a file, I'm going to call this file pointer InFile. So there's nothing magic about that. It's just you can make this whatever variable name you want. So this will declare a file pointer. File pointer. So this is what connects your program to the file. Now we have to open up the file to complete the connection. So we use the pointer for that in file.open. And then in parentheses, we specify the pathway where that file is located. So in my case, C:/ the temp folder / and then it's called temps.txt, temps.txt. So this will open up a pathway from my program to the file. I want to read in the data and just print it out to the screen. So we'll keep it really simple. Whenever you're opening a file, it's important that you always check to make sure that the operation succeeded. Because if there was something wrong, if you mistype the name, or if your file is located in a different folder, a lot of things can go wrong here. So always test to make sure that this succeeded before you proceed with your program. So to do that, we just need our if statement. So we have an if, and we can use the technique of using not and the file pointer. So parentheses, not in file, close parentheses. So again, when you do the open operation, it returns a code. Either it's going to be true or false. So it returns false if there happened to be an error and it couldn't open the file. So again, not false is true. So if we have a problem, then we will have code here to tell us about it. So I'll put some code here. So if we couldn't open the file, then we'll print a message to the screen, cout, double quote, say error, period, okay, could not open file for read, okay, period, tab, and end line. Then, and if you're working with Windows and you want the message to stay on the screen, in fact, I should say if you're using Visual Studio like I am on Windows, and you want the message to stay on the screen, then we need to do a system pause here or some other technique in order to make sure that our output window does not close quickly. So you can use other techniques for this. So this will pause the program so that we can read the error message, and then we can stop. Okay, so let's fix that. So then I will do a return, and I'll put an error code here of 1. So again, if you have an error and you want to stop the program, we should do a return here and pick a code other than 0, because 0 means that everything worked just fine, and you can pick any number you want here as your return code. So if the file does not open, then we will have this message and the program will stop. If it does work, then great, we can proceed, and I like to print out a message indicating that the program or the file did open. So I'll just say input file opened. So this lets me know then that everything's okay. Just gives me a good feeling that there weren't any problems with the file. Now I can go on. I'm just going to read in the data and print it back to the screen. So I'm declaring a variable for that just called temperature. And how do I read in the information? Well, we had cin before to read in information. So if you saw the video where we were writing out to a file, then we replaced cout with the file pointer. So in this case, if we're reading data, we replace cin with the input file pointer. So it's in file, and the insertion operator as we would use before, and then the name of the variable. So temperature. Okay, so this reads a number from the file. So that's all you need to do. So it's really simple. Now, in order to see this on the screen, let's print the data back out again. And I'm working with real numbers, so let's do some manipulators to make sure the formatting looks correct. So we'll do a cout fixed and set precision to 2. So that means that our output can be nicely formatted. All right, so we'll read in a number, print it out to the screen, cout temperature, end line, and that will be it. All right, now this isn't going to read all the data. This is just going to read one number and print it to the screen. But this will tell us several things: that we have the file correct, we've downloaded it, and we've placed it into the right folder. We were able to open it successfully, or else we didn't get an error. Then we can read in and print one number. All right, so let's take this just one step at a time. If we can read one number, then we'll go back and modify the program to read all of them. So let's compile and run the program at this point. Here's the output. So we were able to open the file successfully, so that's good. Then we read and printed the number 12.3. Then we're at the bottom of the program. So this was really simple. It just showed that we could open the file. Let's compare that to the file data itself. So if we bring that in, you can see that 12.3 is the first number in the file, and that's the number we read, and we did print that to the screen. Okay, well, that's good, but we still have a lot of numbers left in the file, so how do we read and print all of them? Right, well, of course we don't want to have a copy and paste for every single one of those. We want to put a loop here instead. So let's put these two statements in a loop, and then we can read and print all the data. Normally, your data files are going to be so large that you need some way to detect when you're finished reading all the data, instead of having to count all the numbers and then putting some loop here that will go from 1 to that number of items in the file. So we will take care of that and introduce that as a new thing here for detecting the end of the file as well. So we want to put a loop here. Okay, so let's do while. And one technique you can use is this. Okay, while not in file dot EOF, and then parentheses after that. So what this does, and let me go ahead and get the curly braces here. Let's move this one down below, right there, so that both of these statements are in the loop. And I'll even tab that over a little bit. All right, so what this is saying is while we have not reached the end of file. Okay, so not in file EOF. So when we reach the end of file, this produces the value true. So in the same way that there's a code that we get when we try to open a file, this is going to check to see if we've reached the end of the file. And of course, if we haven't reached the end of the file, then this is going to be false. So not false is true, we stay in the loop. When we do reach the end of the file, then that means that we want to stop, so we exit the loop. Okay, so end file EOF, that's going to be false until we get to the end of the file, and then it's going to be true. Not true is false. We exit the loop. So you can use this to just check to see if you've reached the end of the file. I maybe have said loop, but when I've reached the end of the file. Okay, so check for end of file. All right. So if we haven't reached to the end of the file, we'll keep reading. So we'll input a number and we'll write the number out, and then we just keep going until we reach the end of the file. So now we should read and print all the data, and we should also clean up the program and terminate it nicely. So as always, when you're working with a file, we should close the file when we're finished. So end file dot close, and then we have to have the empty parentheses there. So that closes the file. So close the data file. All right, now let's run the program and let's see what the output looks like. Now we have the output, and you can see we have plenty of numbers this time. So we have the 1230, that was the first number in the file. Then we have all these other numbers. The last number in the file is 2340. Okay, so we can compare that to the data file itself, and we see the last number is 234. So now this little program has read the complete data file, and it has read and printed all those numbers out to the screen. So then this is the basics of opening a data file for reading. So a quick review, and you can again use this as a recipe for how to open a file. You need to have fstream as your pound include. You need to declare your file pointer. Then you use the dot notation to open the file, and then specify the pathway to the file. Then you should always test to make sure it opened correctly with your if statement. Then if you want to read through a long file of information, you can use this technique. You can use the not end file EOF statement to test to see if you've reached the end of the file or not. And if we're reading from a file, we don't use CN, we use the file pointer. Still use this insertion operator like we would with CN if it were coming from the keyboard, but replace CN with end file, and you can read the data from the file. And then finally, to be thorough with this, and a good programming technique is to close the file when you're finished. That's it. That's how you read data from an existing file.